the Chinese government has all the right intentions. Many of the problems that it has, in some cases, caused on its own, it is trying to rectify. It is trying to manage a deleveraging campaign to make sure that the buildup in debt, both in the household property sectors and more broadly in the corporate sector, is tamped down on. They're trying to clamp down on property market speculation. But what I point out in the article is that there seems to be a sort of dualistic approach that the Chinese government is taking, where it's not quite sure how interventionist it wants to be in the economy. So the government clearly seems to want to rely on the private sector in order to generate more wealth, in order to generate more innovation. At the same time, the government doesn't want the private sector to become dominant in the economy, at least under Xi Jinping, and it wants to make sure that no private sector enterprise goes too big for its britches. We've already seen the takedown of the Ant Group and many other tech groups. So it is this slightly dualistic approach, perhaps one might consider it even a slightly schizophrenic approach, that I think is the real problem. The good news is that China, I think, is pointed in the long term in the right direction. But my concern is that this approach to policy making could lead to a lot of stumbles and accidents along the way, and we've certainly seen quite a few of those already in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, that is the key challenge, isn't it? I mean, trying to find that middle ground between that policy position of wanting to be working for the people, if you like, and not necessarily working for the markets in the way that the Western model has. That is a new path, isn't it? I mean, that's a challenge that they are approaching in a very different way. So I guess the situation for them, the emergent effects that come from acting in ways that they're not entirely sure about, are things we cannot predict. For the past 20 years or so, everyone's been predicting that it's going to come crashing down, and it hasn't. Do you think the chances of that happening are increasing or decreasing?
It's a difficult balancing act, but if anybody can pull it off, China can. But I think the stumbles are the real problem, and those could take on a life of their own. The Chinese government seems very eager to let market discipline work, especially in the financial markets. We've already seen the government trying to send home the message that the implicit guarantee of the entire financial system and of major property developers like Evergrande, that is no longer the case anymore. Markets need to discipline themselves. Investors need to make sure that they're investing wisely. Depositors need to make sure they're putting their deposits in safe institutions. But the problem is if we don't have the attendant institutional framework, which includes corporate governance and transparency improvements in auditing and accounting procedures and the rule of law, then it makes it a little difficult for market discipline to work. So then you're going to have the market trying to guess whether the government is going to intervene finally or not. And even if the government does not intervene, it could set off self-fulfilling expectations that when the government doesn't step in, all hell is going to break loose, even when the problems might be containable and manageable. And that, I think, is a risk that China faces, given the huge volume of debt outstanding and the many other problems that lurk in the system. You could have these expectational problems taking on a life of their own.